Hello learners, welcome to Ecological Economics, that one of the course of postgraduate diploma in sustainability science. We are in this course from the last few session. In the last few session, we have talked about economic thoughts and ecology. When we are trying to understand ecological economics, we need to understand that conventional economic thoughts and that from the perspective of ecology. So we know that environment, there are linkages between environment and economy, and then we understand that the biophysical rule, that energy balance principles from the lens of economics also, and we learn about the scarcity of resources and issues of sustainability in that context, and we have talked about the economic growth model, which conventional economy always talk about, and we talk about ecological economic standard model of economic growth also. So today in this session, let us have a quick look into what are the ecological limits to economic growth, since we know that there are interlinkages between environment and economy. When we're trying to understand the ecological limits to economic growth, what is the ecological economic view of the economy? That is very much I need to understand. When ecological economics, they have a fundamental difference, that especially when we are talking about the vision of economic. So this ecological economics, they are fundamentally different with that of conventional economics, is that pre-analytic vision of the economic process than in classical economics. The economic process, it is sustained by a flow. When we talk about energy balance principle, it is by a flow of low entropy, right? Means high quality energy, materials and ecological services from the environment. So collectively, all these resources and services, they are called as natural capital. So ecological economists, they distinguish between natural capital, that is, this natural capital generates natural resources and ecological services, and the more familiar form of capital manufactured by or residing in humans in their economics, culture and institution. So when you talk about capital manufacture, that can be taxed into two broad forms: human-made or manufactured capitals. When you talk about human-made or manufactured capital, it refers to factories, building, tools, and other physical artifacts. When we talk about human capitals, it refers to the stock of education, skills, culture, and knowledge that is stored in human beings themselves. So the resource augmented technical change and substitution between this natural and the human capitals, they are the core of debate about what we are talking about limits to growth and sustainable development. And you will see in different publications about this debate since last few decades. Some of the among the most renowned exchanges, it is about a debate between famous economists like Herman Daly, Robert Solow, and Joseph Stiglitz. And Daly, in his publication 1997, criticized the growth model of Solow, that was published in 1974, and Stiglitz publication 1997, because the production function that used by Solow and Stiglitz, they assume perfect substitutability of manufactured capital for natural capital. So Daly argues that the two forms of capital that largely are complement, because human capital ultimately is derived from and sustained by energy, materials, and ecological services. But if you look into some of the publication by author Van den Werf, especially in 1997, noted that the substitute complement debate has set less light on the issue than it could, because it tends to characterize the human capital, natural capital relationship at one end of the spectrum or the other, when in fact it is very complex issue that defies a single universal level. So that is how, in a quick view on how ecological economic view the economy, right? So when we come into the ecological limits to economic growth, in the history of this ecological economics, you will see between 1900 to 2000, the world population, grew, in an astoundingly very fast way. From this over, we have seen that 1.6 billion at the beginning of the 20th century to 6.1 billion at the end of the 20th century, right? So, if you look into some of the forecaster predictor, what they predict is that by 2050, global population will exceed 9 billion. Now we have crossed 7 billion. So, in just 100 years, the population doubles 3 times over. So, during this time, the world achieved, vastly higher standard of living. However, population growth occurs unevenly across the globe, with growth rates lower in countries with wealthy economies. Currently, nearly about 25% of all population growth is occurring, as we know that, in the developing world, and in the coming years, the 50 least developed nations are expected to double their population from 800 million to more than 1.7 billion. Then, agrarian lifestyle especially, it dominates the social order of most of the developing countries. And because of this agricultural tasks, they are incredibly, they are labor intensive. So, for that they need large family units, right? So, in this particular underdeveloped or developing countries, societies, children help generate wealth for the family, because many families operate on a basic subsistence level. 2 or 3 children simply cannot provide enough labor to accomplish the farm life's myriad and demanding tasks. So, restricted access to contraceptive, on the other hand, that is also seen. Then limited geographic accessibility to and inadequate funding of family planning, they also contribute to population growth in many of the developed and underdeveloped and developing countries. Like, women who may want fewer children, they might also be restricted from using family planning methods due to lack of education, cultural and religious values, or other adverse social pressure from family members. However, while the overall population today still continue to grow, developed countries are experiencing a lower rate of growth. In the other side, even negative growth is happening compared to other developing countries. So, in fact, if you look into that, growth rates are expected to decline into mid-century, with projection beyond 2050 that indicates that a global population could stabilize or even decline. It's one of the reports of World Population, United Nations in 2004. In that report, UN projected that fertility, means the number of children per mother, they will decline substantially from 2.6 children per woman to just slightly over 2 children per woman by 2050. So, many developed countries like, Germany, Italy and Japan, they are already experiencing a decline as their population ages and the fertility rates fall below the replacement level. While, fertility rates are declining as women have fewer children, the inverse is true for life expectancy also. So, global life expectancy at birth is projected to increase to 75 years by 2050 compared to 65 years at the present time in developed countries, and the regions life expectancy will reach 82 years by mid-century. So, as a country develops economy and expected transition from a country with high birth rate, and that rates to one with low birth, and that rates can be illustrated and can be looked to the 4 stages in what we call as demographic transition model. In this DTM means demographic transition model that can look into 4 stages. Stage 1 is occur in a pre-industrial society where birth rates are high and relatively imbalanced, resulting in a slow and steady population growth. In stage 2, death rates begin to decline with improved food supply. and sanitation, which result in a decrease in disease and overall increase in the lifespan. Then stage 3, you will see in stage 3 is a decline in birth rates due to the reduction in subsistence agriculture and increase in women's education, access to contraception and other social factors. So this is also the stage where population growth begins to level off, right? In stage 4, it shows stabilization in population growth with both low birth and death rates. However, as the population ages, total population can decline, means there will be negative growth, as there are less birth and deaths. So there are several factors which contribute to lower fertility rates in developed countries. So unlike in developing countries, in the developing countries we know that most children generate wealth in the form of labor. But in case of developed countries, children are not capital assets. They do not need to engage in labor for profit, rather they require financial investment. So due to this financial and opportunity costs associated with child rearing and importance placed on each side social and intellectual development, parents have little incentive to large number of children. So lower rates of child mortality in developed countries also mean that fewer birth rates are needed to ensure survival to maturity. In addition to that, these wealthier countries, they tend to provide the necessary means to women in order to reduce births, including education, employment opportunities, and increase access to family planning services. So as population, with the population growth, number of concerns associated with a declining population. Fewer young people will result in aging population, eventually resulting in shortage of workers to support the growing numbers of retirees. So by 2050, if we assume the current trends happening, like for example in Japan, labor force will fall from 68 million to 46 million. So is in Italy also from 23 million to 14 million, and like Germany's from 41 million to 28 millions. Then aside from likely decline in economic productivity, an aging population can also strain a national social security and pension system and have implication on a country's health budget due to higher elderly care costs. So one potent remedy to regional population declines is immigration, which increases the population base by bringing additional workers into a country. So immigrants are also often younger, as we know that, and they tend to have more children. So government incentives to increase the rate of fertility within a country are also an option. For example, look in 2006, that Russia's president called for an increase in government subsidies for children up to 18 months old. Then extended maternity leave while paying 40% of the mother's salary and covered a portion of their care costs. So several other European countries, they have also instituted similar financial incentives, primarily in the form of bonuses or monthly payments in the same way. So most developed countries, as we know, that have already reached stage 4 of the demographic transition model. Right. In addition, there is a result of rapid social economic changes in countries like Brazil, Thailand, and China. They are reaching the final stage rather than quickly. However, while the majority of these developing countries are moving to the second and third stages, many nations, especially in Africa, within the Africa, they are caught up in the second stage because of the extremely slow economic development. Right, that means increasing. Right. So the government of several developing countries, they have attempted various stabilization scheme. Although some we get in some countries success, some countries does not. Kenya, this is one of the first sub-Saharan African country to develop a national family planning campaign in the late 1960s. Well, in the time, their official policy calls for matching the size of the population with available resources. Decisions are left to the individual families. Their approach has had much stresses in fertility rate are declining, contraception use continues to grow. And again, we know that China's one-child policy that mandated by the government in 1979 in China has effectively curbed the growth of the world's most populous nation. However, serious human rights concern has arisen because of abortion, infanticide, abandonment. They are practiced with stunning frequency. Furthermore, many worry that severe gender imbalance will soon result in social trouble, as many men of marriageable age will find it increasingly difficult to find wives. In addition to the relationship between population and wealth, there is an important link between population growth and the environment as well. Many of the natural resources necessary to sustain a population, they are referred to as the commons or common property resources that are shared through open access. For example, water, etc. So, if you look from that environment and that perspective of population and this population growth and environment relation, and then one of the based on concept to understand this is Garrett Hardin's issue, the tragedy of the commons, in which he argues that the overpopulation of a species will deplete their natural resources. The continued population growth it will create an increased demand for natural resources and can lead to resource scarcity. So this problem that could be particularly difficult to manage for open access resources. Unlike open access resources, for example, in the case of common property resources, only the members of the concerned group have a right to use and also right to exclude non-member or outsider. So even the uses of authorized users are regulated. So in case of open access resources, no one has the right to exclude anyone from using resources, and it is a reason that available resources, if we left open, is subject to overuse and destruction. According to 2005 UN ecosystem assessment study, human activity uses nearly 60% of the ecosystem resources in an unsustainable manner. A growing population and that can result in a variety of environmental change, we know that, including an increase in greenhouse gases, emission, that have a direct impact to climate change, air pollution, water pollution, deforestation. When we talk about deforestation, then loss of agrobiodiversity. Again, due to this increase in population, the loss of arable land, which could diminish our ability to supply sufficient food. These are the concerns. The classic dilemma inspired by the work of, we know about Thomas Malthus' theory in the early 19th century, is that an ever increasing population will become a major concern if it reaches the limits of the Earth's carrying capacity. The maximum number of individuals an ecosystem can support without severe repercussions. So this Malthus focus on relationship between population and food supply. It argues that because of population growth that increases geometrically, while food supply grows arithmetically, humans would eventually overturn their food supply with disastrous consequences. So the Malthus sphere argument have been challenged by different economists like Julian Simon and his colleague. Their view is that such prediction failed to account for the enormous capacity of innovation and creative thoughts among humans. Again, Simon argues that creativity is in fact a single ultimate resource processed by the humans. In practice, they point to increasingly productive agricultural practices, falling prices of limited resources like minerals and timber, great advances in food processing and distribution, and technological innovation, which allows for an increasing number of humans to enjoy material prosperity even as natural resources grow increasingly scarce. Furthermore, Simon argues, continued his argument that this continued population growth can lead to a larger and freer markets, economies of scale, and greater ingenuity to come up with technical solutions to ever-evolving problems. Technological advances, among other things, can lead to discovery of additional resources, increase the productivity of resources over time, improve our ability to control the amount of waste that enters the environment, and through conservation and efficiency make available resource last longer. As population concerns continue to evolve, market processes that promote adaptation and creative problem solving will remain an effective mechanism for channeling creativity and increasing adoption and possibility. Then, is there a carrying capacity of the earth for humans? Question comes in front of us. We know that carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals of a population that can be maintained indefinitely by the life support services of a given area of the environment without degrading those life support services, right? So, in principle, the carrying capacity of non-human population is very straightforward. So, each individual has roughly the same demand on its environment, that is food, habitat space for refuse, reproduction and waste assimilation and others. So, a given area of the environment has a relatively fixed amount of its resources that sets the carrying capacity for the population. So, the dynamics of population growth is controlled by negative feedback loops that are characterized by density independent factors like weather, etc. and density dependent factors, that is predation, disease and reproduction, right. So, a population can overshoot its carrying capacity due to a lack in the effect density dependent factors. And when we talk about overshoot, it's a temporary because the negative feedback loop between population and density dependent factor tend to shrink the population when it exceeds its carrying capacity. So, in reality, it is difficult to calculate the carrying capacity of non-human population because population often vary widely over time, often in response to external factors such as climate. So, applying the concept of carrying capacity to human population that is even more problematic because the relationship between human society and the environment is very much complex than that for non-human population. So, there are several ways in which humans are fundamentally different from plants and animals. Few of them, first people use the environment to do much more than feed and clothe themselves. Most of the natural resources consumed for example, in Finland or Japan are used to produce goods and services that are not necessary for the biological survival. Thus, one has to define an average standard of living to begin an assessment of the carrying capacity. Second, there are rapid changes in the types and quantities of resources used by the human population. This flexibility implies that a critical resource now may be unimportant in the future and that an unimportant resource now may be important in the future, right. Thirdly, humans purposefully change their environment in ways that increase the amount of life support. Agriculture, is one of the examples where we show our capability, right. Fourth, humans can increase carrying capacity by expanding the geographical extent of the environment from which they obtain the support. So, in this line, when we look into Japanese economy, it is often described as an economic miracle. The island of Japan is densely populated and has very few natural resources. Nonetheless, the people of Japan enjoy a rich lifestyle, drawing life support from environment scattered across the entire planet that produces their lifestyle. Almost all the paper and wood products used by Japanese come from the trees grown in Southeast Asia and oil are from Middle East. What are the indicators? We know that there are some issues of carrying capacity, right? The concept of carrying capacity and its limitation. What are the indicators and the scale of carrying capacity? We all know that the problems associated with estimating human capacity that have not deterred people from making estimates. In 1979, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, the Dutch inventor of the microscope, published the first quantitative estimate of Earth carrying capacity, that is 13.4 billion people. Since then, since 1679, there have been many attempts to estimate global carrying capacity that ranges from less than 1 billion to more than 1 trillion people. The enormous range In STEAM, it is due to in part of the range of methods employed, depends on method. So this range from assume constraint from a single resource as well as food, assume constraint for multiple sources, mathematical curve find fittings of the population growth rates, generalization from observed population densities, and categorical assertion. So despite all the pitfalls, there are some indicators of the scale of human existence relative to the global environment. These indicators measures human consumption or appropriation of key global resources, environment and services. Examples like, say an example, humans are now the preeminent forces in many of the planet's material cycle. The release of carbon that is stored by fossil fuel combustion and deforestation, other biomass burning contributes to the increase in carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. We also fix more nitrogen annually than natural processes through the production of fertilizer and combustion of fossil fuel. Our mobilization of the trace metals such as lead and cadmium is enormous relative to natural resources that results in their accumulation in soils to levels that cause serious human ecosystem health problems in many nations. So human consumes or control about 40% of global terrestrial net primary production, the total food resources on the planet. Human use about 26% of total terrestrial evapotranspiration, and 54% of water runoff that is geographically and temporarily accessible. So regional water scarcity is also happening, and that has direct impact on economic development, and these scarcities of resources and conflict are growing across the world, right? So human have we can say fully exploited or depleted 2/3 of planet's marine fisheries, as per report of Food and Agricultural Organization 1994. Chronic overfishing that has wreaked havoc with the ecological marine ecosystem and economics of local communities whose livelihood is based on this fishing. About 1/3 of the non-Iceland surface of the planet has been converted to human-dominated landscape that is predominantly cropland in picture. So the resulting loss of original habitat, this is also a major driving force behind the loss of biological diversity and with its ecosystem function. When we lost biological diversity, that is also directly related to, have impact on ecosystem function loss, right? Again, we know that there are global biodiversity assessment that is sponsored by United Nations Environment Program. As per few of the reports, they predict that the future rates of tropical forest loss corresponding to loss of biodiversity is 1 to 10% of all species in the next quarter century, right? So these rates of extinction would be approximately 1,000 to 100,000 times the average expected background extinction rate. We also discuss about all this in course 12 also. These numbers describe a population whose demand for environmental support which is largely relative to its environment. So with population and affluence on the rise, this demand will rise regardless of any efficiency gains won by technical improvements. Then what are alternatives? What do we have to do? Growth has to go. So we need to find out alternative models of production, creation of wealth and utility, right? So to evaluate the potential for sustainability and viability of policy for moving economic activity in that direction, so we need these growth models, and those growth models must account for the relation between human made and natural capital. So we also have seen that a number of models have been developed that begins to address some of those issues what we discussed, and some of the growth models are revised. When we are trying to develop a revising growth model, some questions come in our mind. First, does resource depletion limits growth? Will the environment's ability to process waste limit economic growth? To what degree can human-made capital substitute for natural capital? To what degree can an educated workforce substitute for natural capital? And we are looking for the answer of the question, does resource depletion limit growth? We know the number of debate about the potential for resource depletion to limit economic growth that focuses on the potential to substitute for scarce natural resources. Right. When we look from the lens of microeconomic analysis, it indicates that substitution can allow economic activity to continue, but they ignore the macroeconomic and global effects of substitution. So, resource depletion often increases the quantity of human-made capital required to extract a unit of natural resource. So, these costs have been generally ignored in growth models of this microeconomic analysis. So, to represent the effect of resource depletion on economic activities, there is a need to suggest that the quantity of manufactured capital, labor and natural resource required to extract a unit of natural resources should be modeled separately from the production by other sector. In addition to this, the feedback loop from the resource depletion to the quantity of factory inputs required should also be modeled explicitly. So, technology has the potential to offset the effect of depletion, but the effect of technology should be represented consistently with the historical record of diminishing returns to the ability of technology to reduce the quantity of human-made and natural capital required to extract resources, right? When the answer to the question, will the environment ability to process waste limits economic growth? As we know that number of models what we have seen today, this used damage function to represent the reduction in economic output related to levels that are possible in unpolluted environment. For example, the ICE model means the dynamic integrated climate economy model, right, that specify a 1.67% reduction in GDP when temperature rises 3 degrees Fahrenheit relative to pre-industrial level. So, this damage function arbitrarily assumes that all types of environmental damage reduce output at a specific rate in the future. So, these types of damage function do little to advance our understanding of how energy and material flow between the economy and environment and within economic system feed back to the production of the output. So, we must represent the flow of matter, these flows of matter and energy explicitly in 3 specific ways. First, energy and the material flows in environment that create a natural capital which human extract and transform to raw material. Second, the use and depreciation of human-made capital creates material and energy waste. Third, those wastes are assimilated by natural capital. So, the growth model must represent the accumulation of waste in environment and the economic activity generates waste faster than natural capital can process them. So, growth models should account for the fact that the accumulation of waste has negative feedbacks on economic output that often are lack in the time and space. So, the accumulation of waste material can reduce the productivity of natural capital as when ozone accumulates in the troposphere and depresses crop yield. So, this increases the quantity of human-made capital required to produce a given quantity of food. So, the accumulation of waste also slows the rate at which natural capital can process waste material, as when sewage reduces the ability of aquatic ecosystem ability to process the organic material. So, finally, the accumulation of this waste material reduces the productivity of human-made capital in intermediate sector, as when this pollution increases, work days lost to illness, right. The answer to another question, to what degree can human-made capital substitute for natural capital? The notion that economy can grow at infinitum depends in large part on the assumption that technical advances can reduce the quantity of natural capital required to produce a unit of economic output. So, in this case, growth models must account for the forces that produces the broad patterns of energy in the material intensity of GDP. Much of the reduction in energy use per dollar of GDP in industrial nation is associated with the substitution of high quality for low quality foods. So, further reduction in the energy intensity of economic activities should be assessed relative to the availability of high quality fuels. So similarly, a significant portion of the reduction in the use of mineral and metal per unit output may be associated with changes in trade pattern. So many developed nations now, they import that large quantities of metal and mineral that embodied in finished goods such as automobiles. So these embodied metal and mineral flows rarely are accounted for in growth model. Finally, model must represent the factors that cause resource use in waste production that changes with income. In fact, income often is not a causal factor, but rather income is correlated with causal factors such as the special intensity of economic activities and imports. Then another answer to another question: to what degree can an educated workforce substitute for natural capital? We are investing in education. Now, when investment in education happen, it increases labor productivity, and we also recognize as economic growth. Thus, it may be possible to sustain economic growth with little or no increase in the flow of services from natural and manufactured capital by producing a more educated workforce. So, to assess this potential, that growth model must represent the cost of increasing the levels of education. So, education consumes, considerable amount of natural and human-made capital. So, this cost may be small today, but they could become quite large over time. So, some models, if you look into some available models, they assume that the skill level of workforce grows steadily over time, but over a long enough time horizon, the cost associated with such an increase could become quite large. So, for example, what is the educational efforts required to increase the skill level a modest 2% per year over the next century? Does this increase imply that every person goes to college or gets an advanced degree? So, the cost of such an effort would be large in terms of both the educational workforce and opportunity cost of extended schooling. So, the longer someone stays in the workforce, the shorter time will he be in the workforce in future. In the same time, we know the use of fossil fuels that had produced a major alteration of the planet's carbon cycle, and that has a major contribution to climate change. And we also know that fossil fuels are finite. World oil production, that will be peak into another 10 to, already we are in the peak, but it will be more dangerous phase after within this 10 to 15 years. And the coal will follow suit a few decades later that. So, the more stringent restriction on carbon emission than those currently contemplated would be shortened this lifetime. So, it seems unlikely that we will tap the waste vast store of energy in tar, sand and oil shale due to their high carbon intensities. So, thus humanity faces that fundamental challenges. One is the need to replace fossil fuels with solar or other renewable resources based technology that have promethean qualities. Then there two qualities are very critical. First, the new energy technologies must eliminate or substantially reduce carbon emissions. Second, they must approach the abilities of fossil fuels to generate economic wealth per heat unit. So, solar technologies clearly meet the first criteria since they are free from carbon. So, the extent to which they meet the second criteria is an open question, because solar energy inherently is a lower quality than fossil fuels. So, the diffuse nature of incoming solar radiation requires a significant investment of energy and materials to capture, collect and concentrate sunlight. So, this means that many solar technologies deliver a lower energy surplus than fossil fuels. Equally important, the substantial material scaffold that required to collect solar energy is made from fossil fuels. So, solar energy therefore currently is, we can say, parasite on fossil fuel system because they cannot reproduce themselves. So, many biomass based fuels such as ethanol are feasible recipes, but fail the test of viable technology because of low net energy yield and high environmental cost. So, on the other hand, some technologies such as solar parabolic collectors have become viable through innovations that improve their net energy yield. So, photovoltaic and wind turbine also exhibit significant technical improvement. So, the issue is whether a sufficient number of solar technologies can move from feasible to viable status in terms of their net energy return and whether they can be scaled up in time to offset the economic effects of fossil fuel depletion. So, if we summarize today's broad discussion, ecological limits to economic growth, in this discussion, we know that to guide the development of sustainable economies, we need two economic models that properly reflect the physical and ecological basis of economic activity and for the important feedbacks between the economy and the environment. Specifically, they must embody realistic limits to the degree to which we can substitute human-made capital for natural capital and account for critical role of ecosystem services as well as marketed natural resources. And this is not a pessimistic assessment because one can assume considerable potential for substitution between human and manufactured capital and among various forms of natural capital. So, some ecosystem services are an irreplaceable and complementary nature among the factors of production effectively limits substitution. So, the continual decline in natural capital around the globe and resultant limits that nature poses for economic growth indicates that the need to innovate new solution approaches in managing environment and development. So, there is always ecological limits to economic growth. Thank you very much.